1918. Service is our motto. The poor, the rich, the middle class and all are given the best of care and attention at all times. You have the privilege to select what you want. In your time of need, contact the capable, the competent, and the dependable staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home who is genuinely concerned with your care. At J.W. Williams Funeral Home, you are aptly served by the proprietor president, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, who continues the traditions and values set forth by the past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. Your announcers for the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Sunday morning program are Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Reverend Isaac H. Owens, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, Minister Frankie Harmon, Miss Sandra Johnson, and Deacon Earl Clark, Jr.
Thank you, and good morning, friends. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be brighter after listening to our program. The family of Mr. Carsavian Marquez Harvey of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Elder Adrian Marcel Oliver Sr. of Columbus, Georgia. The family of Mr. Dedrick Damon Stiles of Arabic, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for the food, the flowers, the condolences, and all other expressions of sympathy and kindness shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. Mr. Carsavian Marquez Harvey, age 21, of 1510 South Pecan Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Sunday, November 20th, at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Carsavian Marquez Harvey, age 21, was held Tuesday, December 6th, at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Portico in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Isaac H. Owens, pastor of the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, officiated. The burial followed at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted mother, Miss Marion Tamika Hayes of Cordele, Georgia, his beloved and caring father, Mr. Carl Harvey, and his wife, Mrs. Stephanie Harvey of Cordele, Georgia. His loving sisters, Miss Acacia B. Wedges of Hinesville, Georgia, Miss LaRonda Harvey of Washington, his beloved grandmother, Mrs. Martha May Hayes of Cordele, Georgia, his beloved aunts and uncles, Miss Vera Hayes, Miss Renee Harvey, Mr. Anthony Paul, and Mr. Keon Clark, all of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Regina Hayes of Atlanta, Georgia, and Miss Sharon Morrell of Oglethorpe, Georgia. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive Mr. Carsavian Marquez Harvey, age 21, of 1510 South Pecan Street, Cordele, Georgia. Elder Adrian Marcel Oliver Sr. age 49, of 1230 Freedom Ridge Drive, Columbus, Georgia, died Sunday, December 4th, at the Phoebe Putnam Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. The funeral service for Elder Adrian Marcel Oliver Sr., age 49, was held Saturday, December 10th, at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Portico in Cordele, Georgia. His pastor, Pastor Jerry L. Gardner, pastor of Israel Temple Worldwide Industry Incorporated, officiated. His beloved uncle, the Reverend Eddie Grant Oliver, delivered the eulogy. The burial for Elder Adrian Marcel Oliver Sr. will be held Monday, December 12th at 10 a.m. at the Andersonville National Memorial Cemetery in Andersonville, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Robin Walton Oliver, his beloved children, Mr. Adrian Marcel Oliver Jr., Miss Nina Haddock, his beloved stepdaughter, Miss Latasha Shelton, 3 beloved grandchildren, his loving and devoted mother, Mother Lula May Oliver, his loving sisters, Mrs. Mary Jones, Miss Bobby Willis, Miss Ardina Caldwell, Miss Lucille Frazier, and Miss Mary Caldwell. His beloved brothers, Mr. Willie James Oliver, Mr. Antonio Oliver, Mr. Frank Caldwell, and his wife, Mrs. Marie Caldwell, and Mr. Jimmy Town. A host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive Elder Adrian Marcel Oliver Sr., age 49, of 1230 Freedom Ridge Drive, Columbus, Georgia. Mr. Dedrick Demond Stiles, age 27, 154 4th Street, East Araby, Georgia, died Saturday, November 19, at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Dedrick Demond Stiles, age 27, was held Saturday, December 10th at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Portico in Cordele, Georgia. Pastor Lamar Thomas officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted father, Mr. Kenneth Stiles, and his wife, Mrs. Pamela Stiles of Cordele, Georgia, his beloved sisters, Mrs. Martisha Hamilton Kellum, and her husband, Mr. Jafar Kellum of Cordele, Georgia, Mrs. Kendranika Stiles Harris, and her husband, Mr. Dontavius Harris of Columbus, Georgia, Miss Kenya Stiles and her husband, Mr. Brandon Stiles of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Tika Power and her husband, Mr. Jewel Power of Warwick, Georgia. His beloved brother, Mr. Rasheen T. Hamilton of Cordele, Georgia. His loving and devoted grandmother, Mrs. Rosa Hamilton of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved aunts and uncles, Mr. Roger Lee Fields, Mr. Davis Field, and Mrs. K. Francis Brown and her husband, Mr. Walter Brown, all of Araby, Georgia. Mr. John Hamilton, Mr. Hugh Fields and his wife, Mrs. Irene Fields, Mr. Charles Fields and his wife, Mrs. Mary Fields, all of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Ellis Porter and Miss Tamika Hamilton, both of Albany, Georgia, Mr. Anthony Fields and his wife, Miss Sonia Fields of Thomasville, Georgia, and Mr. James Fields of Moultrie, Georgia. A host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Dedrick Demond Styles, age 27, of 154 4th Street East, Araby, Georgia. Again, the family of Mr. Carsavian Marquez Harvey of Cordell, Georgia. The family of Elder Adrian Marcel Oliver Sr. of Columbus, Georgia. The family of Mr. Dedrick Demond Styles of Araby, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. May God bless each of you, is their prayer. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordell and Vienna, were in charge of each of these arrangements during the past week. And now, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Mr. Keith Bernard Fuller, affectionately known as Hammer, age 53, of 220 East Allen Street, Leslie, Georgia, died Wednesday, December 7th, at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Yolanda R. Cook Fuller of Leslie, Georgia. His loving and devoted children, Miss Keonda Fuller of Columbus, Georgia, Miss Kiara Fuller of Americus, Georgia, Miss Kanisha Fuller of DeSoto, Georgia, and Miss Kia Fuller of DeSoto, Georgia. 4 beloved grandchildren. His loving and devoted mother, Miss Dessa May Fuller of DeSoto, Georgia. His beloved sisters, Miss Kenyatta Watts of Albany, Georgia, Miss Keisha Watts of California, Miss Takia Watts of Smithville, Georgia, Miss Adrian Watts, and Miss Timika C., both of Sylvester, Georgia. Miss Sarah Dice of Americus, Georgia. His beloved brothers, Mr. Tony Fuller, Sr., and Mr. Frederick Fuller, both of DeSoto, Georgia. Mr. Kendrell Watts of Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Frederick Reddick of Edenton, Georgia. Mr. Matthew Watts and Mr. Quintavious McClendon of Sylvester, Georgia. His beloved mother-in-law, Mrs. Pearlie Cook Paul of DeSoto, Georgia. 5 beloved sisters-in-law, 3 brothers-in-law, a host of cousins to include special cousin, Mr. Ulysses Dice of Perry, Georgia. A host of friends to include his best friend, Mr. John Walker, Mr. Marcel Clark, Mr. Reginald Clark, and Miss Donna Hawkins survived. Mr. Keith Bernard Fuller, affectionately known as Hammer, age 53, of 220 East Allen Street, Leslie, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Keith Bernard Fuller, age 53, will be held Saturday, December 17th at 11 a.m. in the sanctuary of the Zion Hill Baptist Church in Leslie, Georgia. Prophetess Tony Fuller will officiate. The burial will follow at the St. John Cemetery in Leslie, Georgia. The public walk-up visitation will be Friday, December 16th from 1 until 5 p.m. at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Mr. Mario Rashid McCray, age 33, of 905 Broad Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, November 23rd in Lee County, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted mother, Miss Faye McCray of Cordele, Georgia, his adored children, Master Mario R. McCray Jr., Miss Tiffany T. Fluellen, and little Heavenly L. McCray, his beloved sibling, Miss Kiana R. Melendez of Naples, Italy, Mr. Sadak A. Jackson of Cordele, Georgia, his stepbrothers, Mr. Rick Taylor, Mr. Richard Dawson, Mr. Montreal Dydale, his beloved grandparents, Mrs. Eloise Clark and her husband, Mr. Willie B. Clark of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Deacon Eddie Porter Jr. of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved aunts, Mrs. Nicolyn Jackson and her husband, Mr. Lester Jackson of York, South Carolina, Miss Katima A. Passmore and Miss Maya Cortez and her husband, Mr. Joe Cortez, both of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Miss Anna Savage of Cobb, Georgia, and Minister Cassandra Porter of Cordele, Georgia. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive Mr. Mario Rashid McCray, age 33, of 905 Broad Street, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Mario Rashid McCray, age 33, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangement. Miss Jennifer Jeanette Royal, affectionately known as Popcorn, age 57, of 520 Brick Street, Vienna, Georgia, died Friday, December 16 at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Miss Keandra Atkins and her husband, Mr. Jaquez Atkins of Konya, Georgia, Mr. Memrish Brown III of Vienna, Georgia, two loving grandchildren, Ashley and Thailand, her loving and devoted parents, Mr. Bruford Royal Sr. and Mrs. Cora Parker Royal of Cordele, Georgia. Her loving and devoted sisters, Mrs. Rudine Warren and her husband, Mr. Benny Warren of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Lois Adams and her husband, Mr. Sean Adams of Jacksonville, Florida, Miss Jacqueline Bond of Atlanta, Georgia, Miss Brenda Fletcher, Miss Dolores Rouse and her husband, Deacon Arnett Rouse of Cordele, Georgia, and Mrs. Queen Evans and her husband, Mr. Norman Evans of Birmingham, Alabama. His beloved brothers, Mr. Anthony West Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Dorothy West of St. Mary's, Georgia, Mr. Nathaniel Royal of Warner Robins, Georgia, and Mr. Bruford Royal and his wife, Mrs. Mary Royal of Cordele, Georgia. Her beloved aunt, Miss Mary G. Hill of Cordele, Georgia, a host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends, to include her special friends, Miss Johnny Mae Morgan, Miss Deborah Perry, Miss Valeria Peterson, Miss Renee Jones, Miss Veronica Hartbridge, and Miss Sharon Tripp. Survived Miss Jennifer Jeanette Royal, affectionately known as Popcorn, age 57, of 520 Brent Street, Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Jennifer Jeanette Royal, age 57, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mother Leslie Mae Adams Harris, age 85, of 601 South 5th Street, Vienna, Georgia, died Saturday, December 10th at the Neverson Health in Macon, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mrs. Betty Bryant and her husband, Mr. Hentley Bryant of Vienna, Georgia, Miss Eveline Beal of Chesapeake, Virginia, Mr. Bobby Brown and his wife, Mrs. Carolyn Brown of Vienna, Georgia, Mrs. Tammy Brown and her husband, Mr. Vaughn Brown of Peachtree Corner, Georgia, Miss Rhonda Zellner and her husband, Mr. Tim Zellner, and Mr. Maurice Brown and his wife, Mrs. Tamala Brown of Warner Robins, Georgia. A host of beloved grandchildren, great-grandchildren, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive Mother Leslie Mae Adams Harris, age 85, of 601 South 5th Street, Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for Mother Leslie Mae Adams Harris, age 85, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordele and Vienna, are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Friends, that conclude our funeral notices for this morning. And as always, we do remind you concerning our pre-funeral arrangements planning available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, with packages available with a single pay, a 3-year pay, a 5-year pay, and a 10-year pay. So please stop by and talk with us concerning your pre-funeral arrangements needs available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. And also whole life insurance is available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
And now for our announcements. The St. Mark Baptist Church of Vienna, Georgia invites everyone to share with them in their pastor's retirement celebration of 24 years of service to the St. Mark Baptist Church on Sunday, December the 18th, during the 11 o'clock a.m. worship service. Minister Carolyn Marshall of Zion Baptist Church, Atlanta, Georgia, will be the guest speaker. Come out and share with St. Mark as they congratulate Reverend E.L. McCrae for 24 years of service to the St. Mark Baptist Church as he is retiring at this time. Deacon Benny Howard, chairman of deacons. Reverend E.L. McCrae is the pastor. The Greater Mars Tabernacle Baptist Church extends a cordial invitation for you to worship with them today. You may join them Facebook Live at 9 o'clock a.m., Tuesday midday prayer conference at 12 o'clock noon, Thursday prayer meeting and Bible study at 6 o'clock p.m. The call-in number for the conference call is 229-329-7611. Deacon Arthur L. Parker, chairman of deacons. Reverend Dr. K.M. Williams is the pastor. The St. King Baptist Church, extends a cordial invitation for you to worship with them during their worship service. Worship service begins at 10:15 a.m. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Reverend Woody Burnham is the pastor. The Mount Zion First African Baptist Church conference call scheduled Sunday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Prayer Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 o'clock noon. Bible study is held each Wednesday at 5 o'clock p.m. The call-in number is 339-209-6419. Deacon Joe Wedge is chairman of deacons. Reverend Dr. Dan James III is the pastor. You have a cordial invitation to worship at the Gethsemane Baptist Church today. Worship service begins at 10:30 a.m. Mother Mary S. Butler is the church mother. Deacon Johnny Wilson, chairman of deacons. Reverend Cecil Straughter is the pastor. The Davis Chapel CME Church family extends you a cordial invitation to worship with them each second and fourth Sunday, beginning at 10 o'clock a.m. Face masks are required. Steward Ruby Barrett is the chairman of stewards. Reverend Arnell Wilburn is the pastor. The Spring Hill Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them each second and fourth Sunday. Services begin at 10 o'clock a.m. Mother Lily Mathis is the church mother. Reverend Shannon Sillette is the pastor. You have a cordial invitation to worship at the New Oak Grove Baptist Church today. Sunday school begins at 9:15 a.m. Worship service at 10 a.m. Face covering is required. Deacon Alonzo Jones is the chairman of deacons. Reverend W.W. Wilson is the pastor. The McAfee Grove Baptist Church of Leesburg invites everyone to worship with them family nights, Tuesday at 7 o'clock p.m., small class study Thursday at 7 o'clock p.m., Sunday morning worship at 9 a.m. You may join them by calling 425-436-6341. The access code is 708058. Reverend Dr. Robert L. Morgan Sr. is the pastor. The Jerusalem Baptist Church of Ellaville, Georgia, Family and Friends Day service will be held today, Sunday, December the 11th. Sunday school begins at 10 o'clock a.m. Worship service at 11 o'clock a.m. Reverend Johnny Hosley will be the guest speaker. Dr. Deanne Hosley is the pastor. The Gospel Travelers of Oakville, Georgia will be celebrating their 59th gospel anniversary and CD release on Sunday, December the 18th at the Warwick Community Center in Warwick, Georgia. Groups on program will be Chosen of Albany, Nathan Bartell and Reality of Ashburn, Truly Blessed of Albany, Brother Norris Mathis of Warner Robins, Georgia, the Gospel Stars of Lilly, Georgia. The doors will open at 4 o'clock p.m. The program will begin at 5 o'clock p.m. Free admission. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. The Wilcox County Head Start is offering free child development services for eligible families with children between the ages of 3 and 5. For more information, please contact Mrs. Donna Jenkins at 229-365-2341 or 478-922-4464. The annual Emancipation Proclamation service will be observed on Sunday, January the 1st at 2:30 p.m. at the Bethel CME Church in Cordele, Georgia. Reverend Anthony Robinson is the pastor. The message will be delivered by Reverend Charles Luke. A special Emancipation Proclamation chorale will provide music. It is requested that everyone in attendance wear a mask and practice social distancing, and other healthy protocols are to be followed. You have a cordial invitation to worship at the Mount Calvary Baptist Church today. Worship service begins at 10:30 a.m. and each of you have a cordial invitation to attend. The Mount Calvary Baptist Church is also pleased to announce the initial sermon of Sister Kathy Spears will be delivered on Sunday, December the 18th at 2:30 p.m. at the Mount Calvary Baptist Church. Everyone has a cordial invitation to come out and be a part of this worship service. Deacon Leon Spears, chairman of deacons, Mother Evelyn Lewis, church mother, Reverend Isaac Owens is the pastor. That concludes our announcements for today.
And now for dedication. Our first selection this morning is dedicated in loving memory of Deacon John Lee Clark, who departed this life December the 3rd, 2010. Dedication requested by the entire family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory, Mr. Robert Coley, better known as Junebug, who would have celebrated his birthday December 9th. Dedication requested by his beloved wife, Mrs. Loretta Coley, his children, grandchildren, and the entire family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Jerusha Hobbs, who would have celebrated her birthday December 11th, dedication requested by our beloved son, Mr. John Manning, and the entire family, our big auntie, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory, Mrs. Odessa Denard, who would have celebrated her birthday December 12th, dedication requested by the Cobb and Hardeman family. Precious memory lingers still. In loving memory, Emmett James Billings, who would have celebrated his birthday December 15th, dedication requested by his beloved wife and the entire family, gone but not forgotten. Mr. Emmett James Billings. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following. Happy anniversary to Mr. and Mrs. Dwight Harris Sr. of Americus, Georgia, who celebrated their anniversary Wednesday, November 30th. Dedication requested by the entire family. God bless your union. Deacon and Mrs. Dwight Harris Sr. of Americus, Georgia. God bless your union and keep it strong. Special anniversary wishes goes out. Happy 50th anniversary to Dr. Arthur and Elder Lorraine West, who will celebrate their anniversary Saturday, December 17th. Dedication requested by their beloved son, Elder Randy and his wife, Maria, and the grandchildren and the entire family. Happy 50th wedding anniversary to Dr. Arthur and Elder Lorraine West. God continue to bless your union and keep it strong. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following. Happy birthday to little Markel Wicker, who celebrated his birthday Thursday, December 1st. Dedication requested by the Wicker family. Happy birthday to Katrina Milligan, who celebrated her birthday Thursday, December 1st. And also happy birthday to Bernard Milligan, who celebrated his birthday Wednesday, December 7th. Dedication requested by Mrs. Orlandra Milligan and the entire family. Happy birthday to Mrs. Victoria McClendon, who celebrated her birthday Wednesday, December 7th. Dedication requested by the entire family. Happy birthday to Deacon Perry Jones, who celebrated his birthday Wednesday, December 7th. Dedication requested by the entire family. Happy birthday to Miss Marva Turner, who celebrated her birthday Thursday, November 8th. Dedication requested by the Grace and Turner family. And happy birthday to our own Brother Mark Westbrook, who celebrated his birthday Saturday, December 10th. Dedication requested by his beloved parents and the entire family there, and his pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, and the members of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church. Deacon Tommy Ford and the entire membership says, happy birthday to our own musician, Brother Mark Westbrook. God bless you, and many, many more. Happy birthday to Miss Cranda Harvey Richards, who is celebrating her birthday today, December 11th. Dedication requested by the Harvey and Richard family and her beloved mother, Miss Geraldine Harvey, and the entire family. Happy birthday to Miss Jennifer Turner, who is celebrating her birthday today, December 11th. Dedication requested by the entire family. Happy birthday to Mr. Silas Didell, who will celebrate his birthday Tuesday, December 13th. And also, happy birthday to our dear friend, Sister Doretha Didell, who will celebrate her birthday Thursday, December 15th. Dedication requested by their entire family. Happy birthday to Miss Mary Reese, who will celebrate her birthday Friday, December 16th. Dedication requested by her husband, Mr. Jake Reese, and the entire family, all of the children and the entire family. Happy birthday to Miss Sharon Butts, who will celebrate her birthday Friday, December 16th. Dedication requested by the entire Butts family. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: Deacon James Smith and family, Deacon Henry King of the Gethsemane Baptist Church, the King and Rogers family, Ms. Willie Mae Crapp and family, Mrs. Gloria Simpson and family of Americus, Georgia, Mother Alberta Rouse and family of Americus, Georgia, Mother Mamie Robinson and the entire Robinson family, Mrs. Rosemary Jones and Deacon Kelvin Jones and family, Deacon James and Dr. Elizabeth Maddox and family, Mother Eddie Mae Graper and family, Mrs. Ruby Jackson Kinchin and family, Mother Mary Butler, church mother of the Gethsemane Baptist Church, Mother Adeline Lofton, church mother of the Little Rock Baptist Church of Araby, Georgia, Mr. Earl Passmore and family, Mr. Larry Passmore and family, Mr. Louis Harriel and family, Mrs. Yvette Zanders and family, Mr. Alvin Jones and family, Ms. Rosa Rice and family, Deacon and Mrs. Grandy Ridley and family, Mr. Henry Wheeler and family, Mr. Ricky Smith and family, Mrs. Daphne Askew and family, the Black family of Vienna, Georgia, Mrs. Minnie L. Passmore and family, Mrs. Stephanie Westbrook and family, Mrs. Cheryl Royal and family, Mr. Willie James Young and family, Mrs. Shirley Washington and family, Mr. and Mrs. Michael D. Bruce and family, Mrs. Mary Jo Osbley and family, Mr. and Mrs. Carl Westbury and family, Mrs. Charlotte Leonard and family, Mr. and Mrs. Franklin Jordan and family, the Reverend and Mrs. Arthur Jordan and family, Mrs. Dorothy Nadine Young and family, Mrs. Donna Lester and family, Mr. and Mrs. Willie B. Barnes and family, the McClendon family, Mr. Jackie Wheeler and family, Mr. Kelvin Whitfield and family, Mr. Alton K. Brown and family, Miss Rhonda Lester and family, Mr. Calvin Ford and family, Deacon George Jordan and family, Mrs. Christine Kitchen and family, Mrs. Annette Leary and family, Mr. Ira Robinson and family, Mr. Steve Jackson III and family, Mr. and Mrs. Olin Askew and family, Mr. and Mrs. Lonnie Anderson and family, Mrs. Cynthia Rush and family, Ms. Dorothy West and family, Mr. Reginald Billingsley and family, Mrs. Cynthia Webb and family, Mrs. Nettie Barnum and family, Deacon Johnny and Mrs. Mother Vera Perry and family, Mother Mary Benjamin and family, Mr. Bert Kinchin and family, Mr. and Mrs. Alvin Lester and family, Mr. Robert Ford and family, Deacon and Mrs. James Askew and family, Ms. Alice Henry and family, Mr. and Mrs. Donnie Brown and family, Mr. Tony Stubbs and family, Mrs. Anita Whitfield and family, Mrs. Cordelia Brown and family, Mr. Harold Bryant and family, Mrs. Darcy Owens and family, Mr. Arnett Holmes and family, Mrs. Athaline Perry and family, Mr. and Mrs. Clarence White and family, Mrs. Charlie Mae Peacock and family, Mr. and Mrs. Bobby Anderson and family, Mrs. Nettie Mae Wise and family, Mrs. Alton Jordan and family, Mr. and Mrs. Scotty Grant and family, the Clee Cross family, Mr. Clayton Dykes and family, the Charlotte Cheney family, the Clayton family, the Clayton and Coleman family, Mr. Harry Bird Jr. and family, Mrs. Carrie Wheeler and family, Miss Lucia Bryant and family, Mr. Michael Sanders and family, the Reverend and Mrs. Dion Jones and family, Mrs. Aletha Askew, church clerk and trustee of the New Oak Grove Baptist Church, Mrs. Lily Brown and family, Mr. and Mrs. Eddie James Walker and family, the Burks family, the Reverend and Mrs. Lewis Burden and family, Deacon and Mrs. Albert King Sr. and family, the Hazel Clark family, Mrs. Harry Ward and family, Ms. Ruthie Daniels and family, Mrs. Viola Green and family, Mrs. Pearline Roundtree and family, Miss Sarah Coleman and family, retired educator, Miss Margaret Jordan and family, Miss Deacon Walter Brown and family, Mr. and Mrs. Winston Keaton and family, Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Morrell and family, Mrs. Martha Harris and family, Mrs. Mary Morrell and family, Mr. Mandel Lee Johnson and family, the Lester family, Mr. James Byram and family, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Clark and family, Deacon John David Law, Chairman of the Board of Deacon of the Evergreen Baptist Church of Pinehurst, Georgia, Deacon and Mrs. Vet T. Crane and family, Mrs. S.M.A. Davis and family, Ms. Odessa Sheffield and family, Mrs. Benitha Armstrong and family, Mr. Edgar Lee and family, Deacon and Mrs. Willie Fields and family, Mr. and Mrs. Jerome Jordan and family, Mrs. Christine Jordan and family, Mr. Charlie and Mrs. Watine Jackson and family, Mother Willeen McGill and family, Mr. Arnett and Miss Lisa Bryan and family, Miss Lavinia James and family, Miss Lily Cranes and family, the Reverend Jesse and Miss Louise Watts and family, Miss Shanta K. Bowens and family, Mrs. Patsy Carter and family, Deacon and Mrs. Zachary Field and family, Deacon Tommy and Mrs. Gradine Ford and family, retired educator Mrs. Lucille G. Harris and family, Miss Mary Frances Davis and family, Mr. Joseph Glenn and family, Mrs. Nettie Whitis and family, Mr. and Mrs. Judge Glenn and family, Ms. Burrow Patrick and family, Mrs. Corrine Passmore and family, Ms. Gail Chanel Williams and family, Ms. Dorothy Rose Jones and family, Mr. Frederick Hardeman and family, Mr. Lonnie Walker and family, Mrs. Annette Stembridge and family, Miss Eddie Mae Cook and family, Mother Jessica Kate Harmon and family, Mr. Donna, Ms. Ruby Daniels and family, Minister Gardner, Ms. Beulah Morgan and family, Miss Maggie Harmon and family, Mother Willie Pearl Reed and family, Mrs. Fanny Bivens and family, Poland, Georgia, Deaconess Connie James and family, Mrs. Mary Applin and family, Miss Geraldine Ford and family, Mrs. Willie Mae Leary and family of Hatley, Georgia, Deacon Earl Leary and family, Miss Patricia Leary and family, Mr. Eddie Leary and family, Mrs. Mint Redding and family, Mr. William Carter and the entire Carter family of Hatley, Georgia, Miss Geneva Curry and family, Mother Martha Westbrook and family of Araby, Georgia, the family of the late Mother Lucille Westbrook, Mr. and Mrs. Lonnie Walker and family, Mrs. Carolyn Jackson Hicks family, Mr. Alvin and Mrs. Ann Rouse and family, Miss Salita Brown and family, Mrs. Burnell Welburn and family. Our first selection for this morning.
Jesus, he's the lily of the valley.
It is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Mr. Keith Bernard Fuller, affectionately known as Hammer, of age 53, of 220 East Allen Street, Leslie, Georgia, died Wednesday, December 7th at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Keith Bernard Fuller, affectionately known as Hammer, age 53, will be held Saturday, December 17 at 11 a.m. in the sanctuary of the Zion Hill Baptist Church in Leslie, Georgia. Apostle Tony Fuller will officiate. The burial will follow at the St. John Cemetery in Leslie, Georgia. The public walk-up visitation will be Friday, December 16th from 1 until 5 p.m. at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Mr. Mario Rashid McCray, age 33, of 905 Broad Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, November 23rd in Lee County, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Mario Rashid McCray, age 33, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. Miss Jennifer Jeanette Royal, affectionately known as Popcorn, age 57, of 520 Brent Street, Vienna, Georgia, died Friday, December 16 at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Jennifer Jeanette Royal, age 57, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. Mother Leslie May Adams Harris, age 85, of 601 South 5th Street, Vienna, Georgia, died Saturday, December 10th at Neverson Health in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service for Mother Leslie May Adams Harris, age 85, will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. We ready? Our next and final selection for this morning is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones were laid to rest during the past week. The family of Mr. Carsavian Marquez Harvey of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Elder Adrian Marcel Oliver Sr. of Columbus, Georgia, and Dooley County, Georgia. The family of Mr. Dedrick Demond Stiles of Araby, Georgia. This election is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones will be laid to rest during this week. The family of Mr. Keith Bernard Fuller of Leslie, Georgia. The family of Mr. Mario Rashid McCray of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Miss Jennifer Jeanette Royal of Vienna, Georgia. The family of Mother Leslie May Adams Harris of Vienna, Georgia. This election is dedicated to all of the sick and shut-in, all patients in the local and surrounding hospitals, nursing homes, and rehabilitation centers, to our beloved ministers and their devoted family members, to all retired educators, to the men and women serving in armed forces, both stateside and abroad, to all veterans, and to everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. Our program goes out in memory of our past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams, to my wife, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, to my son, Jai Wilkerson Parker. This election goes out to my mother-in-law, Mrs. Billy Ann Hall, and family, to my brother, retired Chief Master Sergeant Norman F. Dexter, and his wife, Dr. Gwendolyn Maxine Dexter, and our grandson, Noble. This election goes out to my sister, Miss Patsy Jackson, and her husband, Jim Jackson of Cordele, Georgia. Dedicated to my nephew, Deacon Kenneth Smith, program chairman of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, to our pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, his wife, Sister Kathy Williams, and the entire Williams family of Cordele and Albany, Georgia, to their son, the Reverend Christopher Williams, pastor of the Antioch Baptist Church of Cuthbert, Georgia. This election goes out to Mrs. Osi Outlaw and family, friend and brother of long standing, the Reverend and Mrs. Johnny B. Dean, and the members of New Poplar Springs Baptist Church of Byronville, Georgia. Mrs. Eleanor Ray and family, minister Mrs. Robbie Williams and family, Deacon and Mrs. George Whitehead and family, Mrs. Alma Johnson and family, Miss William A. Cobb and family, Mrs. Ernestine Gaines and family, Deacon Major Walker and family, Stuart Lonnie Barrett and family, Miss Linda Butcher and family, Mr. Edward Butler and family, Mrs. Carolyn Bolden and family, and the entire Bolden and Perry family, Mrs. Anna Rawl and family, Ms. Virginia Williams and family, Mrs. Christine Gaines and family, Mr. and Mrs. A.B. Levant and family, Mr. Wayne Foster and family, Mrs. Essie Gay and family, Mrs. Gwendolyn Hillman and family, Mr. Nicholas Johnson and family, Mr. and Mrs. Broccoli Johnson and family, Mr. and Mrs. Dwight Johnson and family, Mr. and Mrs. Cedric Johnson and family, Miss Marie Porter and family, Mr. and Mrs. Harry Fox, Elder J.C. and Mrs. Annette Clark and family, Mr. Robert and Mrs. Fanny Polk and family, Minister Robbie, Ms. Joanne Williams and family, to my neighbor, Mrs. Theron Jones and family, the entire Jones and Tarbert family, Mother Dorothy Tarbert and family, Mrs. Juanita Tarbert and family, Deacon and Mrs. John Stubbs and family, Deacon and Mrs. Donna Tarbert and family. Our selection this morning goes out to Mother Grace Patrick and family, Mother Lucinda Ray and family, the Reverend and Mrs. Jolie Butts and family, Mrs. Janie Mae Miller and family, Mrs. Alice Mae McKenzie and family. And again, to each and everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning, it's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. Our program goes out to Mr. Cleveland R. Lemon, oldest staff member of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home and steward of the Bethel CME Church here in Cordele, Georgia. This election goes out to our beloved Miss Issa Mae Sanders and family, Mrs. Annette Felton, and Mr. George Felton and family. Our final selection for this morning.
us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed our program. Tune in again on next Sunday morning. And remember, in your time of need, contact the competent, capable, and dependable staff at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.